Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Factor of the Future. I'm here today with A.W. Schultz. I'm Alexandria Burek, and we have a very special guest, Ryan Conley. I'll turn it over to A.W. so he can introduce our very special guest, Ryan. Thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, so Ryan Conley is here today. So I'm going to put together something that you may not know. What does an aircraft engine, a motorcycle, a beverage line, and a digital dashboard share? Alexander, do you know the answer?
Yes.
Okay, today's desk is Ryan Conley, and he's worked at all of them. As a senior manager as supply chain capabilities and innovation at PepsiCo, Ryan leads initiatives that combine operational excellence with emerging technologies, focusing on line balance optimization, LBO, and I know we're going to get into that because I'm kind of excited to learn more about that because especially within PepsiCo, a lot of automation, a lot of high speed, a lot of uh, technology that goes into it, and these plays an important part, in especially driving some of the finances, I imagine, and continuous improvement. He holds a degree in public policy, urban planning, and political science, and brings a different perspective from what is hands-on experience from rebuilding aircrafts and motorcycles. With over 15 years within PepsiCo, he's held roles in engineering, total productive maintenance, and quality control. He's a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt and expert in beverage engineering and capital expenditure planning, CapEx. He's successfully led over 75 process improvement projects, 75, and has developed training certifications for 60 associates, and implemented improvements in digital transformation, enhancing operational excellence through various technologies advancements throughout the United States. Outside of work, Ryan is a competitive tennis player and a family man passionate about youth sports, motorcycles again, landscaping, and today, Ryan, he's going to be sharing insights on how the human behavior and technology shapes the future of factory environment, consumer packaged goods and industries. This is very relevant to Factory of the Future. And Ryan, thank you for being on our show today.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys for inviting me. Super excited. Been a listener, so I'm excited to contribute today.
So just to get things started, I'm a little bit interested. You said human behaviors, and especially around total productive maintenance, and it's you know its genesis starts around in the 2000s. But with the new generations that have been around there, what have you seen as being what's different, and what things have changed over the time since um, the original TPM?
Yeah. No, so I would say, from a manufacturing standpoint, and just to kind of put reference and scope, my manufacturing, kind of background has really been around consumer packaging goods, right? Primarily with PepsiCo and focusing on really our portfolio of the beverage side. So that's kind of scope and background. But what I'll say is from a operating standpoint and frontline staff and team members, I saw a significant shift somewhere in the mid 2010s, right? Where really just prior to COVID, right? And then COVID obviously pushed that kind of boulder over the mountain, so to speak, is we saw a major shift in terms of tenure, in terms of what folks desired and what was benefits and things that they wanted to go after. It wasn't only necessarily that, hey, what was in the paycheck? It was that total benefits and compensation package, which sometimes is hard to pitch. But on the manufacturing and factory floor, instantaneous feedback, right? In terms of how the machine's working, very clear understanding as to what the machine's telling us. I'll use that reference of the Apple iPhone, whether you give it to a 2-year-old or whether you give it to a 92-year-old, right? Their ability to utilize that piece of technological device is almost comparable in nature, which always amazes me. So my question and challenge to us all is how do we take that iPhone methodology and apply it to a manufacturing environment? How do we make it so it can spread across generational shifts?
That's cool. So, like, almost like an intuitive way of manufacturing, essentially.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah. And that's
awesome.
something we'll talk about as we get deeper into the LBO process. That's a very inherent part of it.
Cool. Cool. Yeah,
Okay.
I have a sense that maybe this is true or not in PepsiCo, but um, you know, just like people today have a sense of instant gratification and the time horizon on most things has just really drastically been compressed. Is that been your experience at PepsiCo as well? Or are you guys, as such a big player in the industry, still working on those long-term, 5-year projects, like is typical in TPM?
Yeah, so what I would say is, one thing I constantly reference and think about is our ability to see results. There's no doubt that in a corporate environment, no matter whom you may work for, the ask and the now is pretty ideal,
Yeah.
in the sense that the short term is really what we're looking for. But what I'll also say is there's also a shift, especially as the economy shifts, both from the North American perspective as well as globally, that we
Hmm.
need to understand a longer term strategy so that we can plan out financially how we will perform and how we will spend against that performance.
Yeah.
And really understand the prioritization of where you spend and what's the go gets. But what I'll say is definitely there is a short term, value add that we're looking for, and
Hmm.
that's one of the things that we really landed upon with the line balancing optimization program. But at the same point in time, there has to be that longer term strategy because some stuff just can't be done overnight. And also knowing that in some of our industries, right, we have a pretty high turnover rate just surely because of competitiveness as well as a constantly emerging market. So when you start talking about, hey, how quickly can you reinvent yourself when your employee base is changing so quickly and or technology is changing so quickly, it's hard to keep up with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess one of the ways we could kind of get into some of the more specifics of this LBO is for maybe you to share some of your favorite projects that you've done. You've done 75, so I'd imagine there were some that are closer to the heart than others.
Yeah.
And then there might be some problem childs that you'd like to share, or at least the ones that just were a little bit more difficult or trying, and kind of how you overcame those obstacles.
Yeah, absolutely. So, real quick, let's just kind of like set scope and set base on what is LBO, right? So, I took down some notes to make sure that I clearly articulated. But the LBO methodology is not, something that just is in a PepsiCo environment. It's across, industry. It's across many different segments. Kind of came about from the book of Elijah Goldratt, where it basically is the theory of constraints, right? So you may hear the term TOC, but theory of constraints is where this kind of stemmed from. But the application of line balancing optimization is designed to maximize the throughput of a manufacturing line by optimizing the interaction between the machine centers. So
Cool.
what I'll say is oftentimes when we do projects within manufacturing environments, we think in a siloed aspect. And what we really fail to do, right, is understand, hey, now that I've implemented this new piece of equipment, how is it interacting with its fellow piece of equipment's upstream and downstream? So that is one thing that we really pull the lever on LBOs for is early management techniques, right? So understanding that commonly across TPM, no matter what we may call it, right, with Toyota principles and so forth, but those 8 pillars, one of them being we pull the lever on early management utilizing LBO, and then the other being is continuous improvement or focused improvement. So that's really just a quick setback of kind of, hey, what is the LBO process? The LBO is built around 5 foundational principles and components. The first being V curve analysis, which is really where we start to identify, hey, what is that common constraint? Which typically on most beverage manufacturing lines is typically the filler. That is the constraint point, the choke point of how much you can get off that manufacturing line. The next part we look at is buffering, right? So how much space or conveyor do I have to buffer material when I'm in a stop condition at any point in time? The next is restart, right? How quickly do I bring this manufacturing line back up or this manufacturing piece of equipment back up to reach my sustained rated speed? We then look at conveyor setup and controls. Oftentimes, as we all spend our time in environments and manufacturing, we grab a bottle of something off the shelf that we make, right? And we're that person. I'll be watching something on LinkedIn and I'll go, I'm curious about how that conveyor is set up because that's not exactly how I'd want those bottles or cans to transport. And then lastly, we talk about fault indication. Fault indication to me really gets back to Alex and AW, the fact about iPhones, right? And the clarity and the simplicity of the technology. All too often, I find that, HMIs, human machine interfaces, right? Those HMIs may speak to the engineer that designed and developed, but doesn't speak to the operator. There's no doubt that in today's industry, right, we have a large skill gap of workforce and laborers that were brought up in an industrial manufacturing environment, went to tech school, right, or went to shop class. And that's something that I'm super passionate about is, hey, those are a missing element in today's educational streams. But when
Yep.
you look at an HMI and the HMI tells you, a node or a code, and it doesn't tell you, hey, the machine that's next to you is down, and that's why you're currently backed up. something so clear and so concise, that's when we are challenged, because then you have to interpret everything that's put across on the HMI. So really look strongly at fault indication. But those are the 5 key elements to the LBO process.
That's really cool. AW, I was just going to say, I think you would have something to say about that. It feels very Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0, the human and technology integration.
Well, my question was gonna be around, so you're doing these projects, so I don't want to say it's a cutout of everyone, but two questions I have. One is this primarily done on new assembly lines, or is it on some of the older assembly lines? And what is the interaction between the associates within these projects, and
Yeah.
how do you engage them?
Yeah, so what I think I'm going to do, AW, as long as you and Alexandra are good with it, is I think I'm going to loop back to Alexandra's question, but answer yours at the same time, right? So Alexandra's question was, hey, give us some of your standouts of challenge lines, right, or challenged, continuous improvement situations, as well as some of your best and bright spots. And then AW, I think I'm going to combine that with some of your questions as well. So there's no doubt that, to me, when you set up a project, no matter whether it's a capital project or a line balancing optimization event, those that work best are started up in a consensus forum. And what I mean by that, right, is it includes all stakeholders and players of the process. So typically when we start our LBO processes, we want to make sure everybody's trained, right, and trained on a common set of core principles. And when I say everybody, I'm not just talking about the leadership team that may be helping, right, or filling out an Excel form. I'm talking about that frontline operating team, that maintenance mechanic team, right? I'm talking about that line controls technician, even whether it's external or internal. So basically bringing together all parties. That's super, super critical. And really, we look at within that training process, the next layer is, now that you understand what that LBO is about, right, which is kind of what I just laid out in those 5 principles, the next process is to understand, hey, what do you have already that you already got your line of sight on? Right? Because more often than not, if we don't allow those personnel that are running those machines 24/7 to voice their opinions, number one, it can show up in other operational inefficiencies. But number two, we're not allowing them to voice something that they see on a day in and day out basis. And I always think about it from, kind of like an inflationary aspect, right? Right now is a really good, situation. 3% inflation rise was announced today, which was slower than the last, right? But at the same point in time, most American population is saying, hey, I'm not getting as much in my grocery cart as I used to get before. And I think about that as an operator, right? That operator's pay, right, more often than not, is not necessarily flexed. That operating pay scale, right, is an hourly wage and then time and a half and double time and so forth. It's not like that operating pay scale is done by how much effort you put in or put out, right?
Yeah.
So when there's times when that line's not running right, whether it's human or machine induced, there's no counter benefit, right, as to how that lands back in the operator pocket.
Right.
So AW, my first response is including all parties. My other response is including all parties, no matter where they sit within the stratification of the organization. I think it's an easy thing to say, and it's oftentimes said in emotional ways, but not always executed against. But it's really important to include everybody in that conversation. So hopefully
How
AW,
do you
that
walk
kind of,
away from a project like that?
yes, absolutely. So, I mean, we know, right, more confident than not, that projects like that, even if are successful at the immediate, aren't successful when the tail light leaves, right? So, it can look successful in the short term. So really the challenge is how do you sustain it? You sustain it by having full buy-in by all parties.
Yep.
So that, I feel like AW kind of gets at some of your questioning, and hopefully it does. Feel free to let me know if it doesn't. But Alexandra, what I'd like to mention on the LBO process, where I'm the type of person that you got to show me, the old school saying of proof in the pudding, right?
Yep.
You got to kind of show me, like, hey, show me that this is a winner. Show me that this works. And I'll start at ground level and I'll work my way into like 3 or 4 examples. So
Yeah.
ground level scenario, my first 11 years of my manufacturing was spent in one manufacturing facility within the PepsiCO network. And there's no doubt, right, depending upon how long you're in a manufacturing environment, you can become what I reference as snowblind, right? There's things
Mm-hmm.
that you see every day that at some point you just become, the norm, right? You become
Yeah.
blinded by. And one of the things that the LBO process hooked me on was we had done it on a small bottling manufacturing line and very complex line. It had merchant supplied bottling that then converted over to blow molding operations,
Wow.
where we were making our own bottles on site, many different packages, many different sizes, lots of changeovers throughout the week, and just a really clear example of a challenged line.
Yeah.
And when we started doing the LBO process and implementing it on that line, I started to see things that I had never seen before. Somebody started to turn my defroster on, right? They started to clear the window when it was really frosty out. And for me, it was things like, hey, why does this shrink packer not start up for 12 minutes while it's accumulating hundreds of cases? That's a miss.
Yeah.
Why does it that this palletizing operation go down instantaneously, although it has backup capability? That's a miss. And second to that, it wasn't only my eyes, it was the fact that I had a couple of associates that were working beside me, one being a controls person that was very intelligent from a controls aspect, may not have come from a beverage manufacturing line background, but
Hmm.
wholeheartedly knew controls. Alan Bradley, Siemens, right? Just kind of across the board. And when we did that process with that individual, it allowed them to better understand how the line operated. And it's all too often that we are making decisions, and it's at nobody's real fault, right? Other than, I'll say, just in general, the totality, where we
Yeah.
don't truly, start from a square one base, because we're always a hand to mouth situation from an employee base, manufacturing base. We don't have enough, right?
Yeah.
Is we don't necessarily train with, hey, what do all these components do, even down to the most simplistic photo eye. All too often, I've seen, starting to get into examples with you, Alexandra, is I've seen folks where they, turn a photo eye, right, which is delaying the timing on a conveying operation. And that works for that one package at that one given time because of that one given flavor. But as soon as you change over, now the line is disrupted. And then
Yeah.
furthermore, that operator's shift is now gone. And now my trail's dirty, right?
Yeah.
So a couple of great examples that come up to my mind, across, multiples of these LBO processes that we performed across many years, is, I've seen lines that are in their 60s, 60% true or total efficiency, which is really strong in some manufacturing environments, depending upon how that line is actually, taxed. And I've seen even some of our, better performing lines, in some of these manufacturing plants that, you don't necessarily think from an old school perspective of there's meat left on the bone, but all of a sudden you start doing this LBO process and you're like, wow, that's eye opening. Wow, that's a problem. We saw things where, a bi-differential or bi-directional table, that's moving forward and back, which is a buffering point to try to
Hmm.
basically keep a line balanced and keep a filler running. We've seen situations where, that is constantly controlling the labeling speed, and hey, it's actually not operating properly, or it's constantly staying loaded. That was not purchased to stay loaded all the time. That is not the original intent. We've seen situations where, because of a lack of early management steps, right, which happen
Hmm.
because that's just the norm in a lot of industry, hey, case conveyors that are running parallel to each other that may be, parallel mated case conveyors, the logic's inversed. Case conveyor B is looking at A's logic and vice versa. All too often when we buy systems from OEMs, a lot of them are replicates, right? Replications of prior
Yep.
systems that may be in a wholly another different country or language. And it's a lift and shift methodology that hasn't necessarily been proven unless you apply that LBO principle of early management.
Yeah, as you're talking through all of this stuff, I'm hearing a lot of number one pre-planning. And if you're in the kitchen, they have like a five P's or something like that, and I can't think of what they are, but it's basically plan, prepare, and prevent. Um, problems. That's
Yep.
essentially what it boils down to.
Yep.
And as AW and I go through this, we typically talk about engaging those frontline employees and also challenging the status quo. So we just did an episode recently, AW. I don't know if it's out yet, but it's on the leadership principles. And Ryan, as you're talking, I just kept hearing those principles on repeat. You're giving your employees autonomy. You're letting them engage and have a seat at the table, like you said, no matter where they're at in the stratification of the organization. You're challenging the status quo. And I think that it's inspiring, and hopefully some of the employees that work at PepsiCo are hearing you talk here today when the episode is published and are emboldened to reach out and, say, hey, I have this idea. Do you guys have any way of like collecting these ideas from employees? Is that kind of how some of your projects come about, or is
Yeah.
it kind of Excel spreadsheet driven and you're looking at metrics saying, oh, okay, we are at this percentage point and we want to go and explore why that is?
Yeah, no, what I would say on that, Alexandra, is, and it's an easy answer to you, but it's a mixture of our approach, right? When you start talking about layers of an organization, once again, no matter what company you may work for, I think, high level senior leadership may be looking for a very instantaneous review and response where it's,
Mm-hmm.
hey, this is the results, it's in a KPI methodology, and it's on a Power BI report, right? Or a
Yep.
Tableau report. With all that said, there is a humanistic aspect that to me has to be done in a one-on-one, face-to-face conversation.
Yep.
I'm always a big proponent of, hey, it's great when you speak about, can you improve my line by 4% points of TE? But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't speak to everybody. There is a culture of conversation. And sometimes it's like, hey, Rye, where did your background lead you to this? And sometimes the only thing I can really lean upon, and it's sometimes referenced from a dirty word aspect, but politics. There's
Yep.
a politics of conversation that has to be done at multiple layers within an organization. So when we're working, when I'm working with the people that I like to work with most, the operating teams,
Mm-hmm.
it's not 4% points of TE. It's how can we get 10 more cases per minute, right?
Uh,
That
okay.
is a tangible talking point.
Yeah.
That is a humanistic aspect. And that's a really key indicator for me. But when I think about the LBO process, another example to me, Alexandria and AW, that speaks is I was working on a dedicated water manufacturing line. And when I was working on this line, this line is lean and mean, right? Runs with a very limited, small amount of people, right? Tight margin business, but really is meant to perform.
Yep.
And not a lot of changeovers, but it's meant to perform. And we were doing a line balancing optimization event. And one of the things that I honestly, it strikes me a lot is I'm the type where I like to be really hands-on. And at the same point in time, there's times when you have to be more reserved and really allow the operation and the process to play itself out. But one thing I've found that through doing LBOs is honestly I could perform better in a remote state with a environment that I'm used to. So I would
Mm.
typically have up between 3 to 5 screens in front of me, balancing between different screens. And we would typically set up some type of a camera device system across the line, right, where we could watch this manufacturing process play out, and we would go through steps. So I was watching this process, and we were just finishing up. We break the line into zones, and this was a monoblock setup. So you have a blow molding operation and a filler set up together, right, where they're touching off. There's no conveyance in between. It's a direct couple, and it then goes into a labeling operation. And I was watching it, and it was a daytime operating shift, right, which typically brings along with it, seniority and tenure. And I was watching it, and the manufacturing shift supervisor, he went over as I was watching this, and he took a paddle limit switch for a full bottle conveyor, and this was pre-labeler, and he pulled that paddle switch up as that labeler was drawing down. And I said, "Hey, excuse me." I said, I got to ask you. I said, there's something you're doing that's really interesting to me, but I know there's got to be a reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's so semi automatic. We got to figure out what you're doing. And that gentleman looked at me and goes, yeah, it's super simple. He goes, I've been watching this line. He goes, I spent a ton of time as an operator and then rose through the ranks. He goes, when I watch this line operate, he goes, I have so much conveyor space that I could be producing filled, blown bottles into to ensure that that labeler doesn't stop. And I said, huh. I said, when you pull that up, what do you think it's doing? So we did a reverse logic lookup, right? And we found out that that paddle switch was the logic point that was saying, hey, if this and this are in an open state, go ahead and restart this blow molding filler operation. What that then led to was a shortening of that timer bit, right?
Cool.
An improvement of that efficiency, because what that meant to me was we were only as good, and he was good, but we were only as good as that one human during that one shift that he was present on.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is a semi-automatic operation, right? So we instituted that logic to allow that machine set to start up more frequently, right? But also
Yep.
balancing with it sustainability, energy consumption,
Yep.
kickouts, right? And balancing it and then validating it. Because all too often we make the change, but we don't check the change.
Yep. That's really cool. AW, I mean, it's interesting how we're all sitting here and we all have different experience that kind of intersects nicely. So I'm from an industrial packaging industry. That's my background. So we would sell 55-gallon steel drums, totes, those types of things. But we also do a lot of consumer goods where, blow molding and injections and things. But AW also came from the food industry and different, I think even PepsiCo, right? You did work there for a period of time. And
Yeah.
so I think it's really interesting because hopefully there's somebody listening to this who's never had the opportunity to experience what it looks like to fill containers. So AW, like you've had some funny stories and some interesting stories. Do you have any stories that related to like what Ryan's talking about in those moments of just really tuning into? Why are you laughing?
Because he's telling me the story, and I'm like, he's telling on a very technical, very
Yeah.
matter of fact. This is the data, like, and I remember the time when I got over to the operators, and he's got squirt guns, squirting everything, and he's squirting dry lube all over the lines. And then he said, "Watch this," and he's putting he's holding like 1,000 bottles back because he's got so much dry lube on the line, which helps the friction
Coefficient
of
of
it as
friction.
it's
Yeah.
transporting over. Uh, but I was like, you did talk about that, but that was just one of the funny stories I had when I going over it. I would just call my I was a supervisor at the time, and we just call it cowboying because
Hmm.
he
Yeah.
didn't know what it meant, but he started getting some problems with back pressure going in the packer, and he just started squirting dry lube all over it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes, there's got to be a reality check too, right? I think AW brings up a really good point, and whatever we might want to call it, right? In whatever cultural or region we're in, but like cowboying it, there's a time and a place where that has to take place. But then there's that reflectionary point of I review and I respond and I recover. That leads you to that path to say, hey, something's not quite right here, right? That's a semi-automatic environment. I think about, there's good and bads with it, but I think about, the automatic cruise control that we have in cars today,
Yeah.
which can be scary at times, right? And then just auto driving in general. But how do we get that line to perform, somewhat close to that? But we know that it's almost, it's going to take a while before we get that hands-off operating, condition.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not, I'll be honest with you, I think as we maximize technology, we're going to see output gains that are only going to require people in a different spot doing a different thing, but still those same people, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be a do away with tomorrow. It's going to be a journey. There's no doubt it's going fast, but it's going to be a journey.
Yeah.
I think about it, AW, something that happened at another event. So just, reminiscing on things and things I saw that were aha moments. A very similar line to what I was just describing, post a shrink packing operation, heading to a palletizing operation. I was watching the line once again, looking at it, multiple screens in front of me, and a machine didn't start up, and the shrink packer didn't start up. So we had cases on the full pack conveyor heading towards the palletizing operation. And all of a sudden, I watched the operator, and this person goes around to the backside of the machine, takes this 24 pack of bottles and moves it forward. And I'm like, huh, that's really interesting, right? So I note it, right? Post-it
Yeah.
note, whether it's mental, physical, and I watch it happen again. And I'm like, you know what? I just got to go down there and I got to figure out what's the why. And I head down and I said, ma'am, excuse me. I said, I've been watching you. I said, I can tell like you are hustling right now, but I got to ask you, like, what is going on with that pack every time you move it? And she goes, well, it's something I just learned. But she goes, when I move that pack in front, when it's in front of that photo eye and I move it, so that photo eye doesn't have a pack in front of it, that packer restarts. And I'm like, wow. I said, I really appreciate you for being, clear and transparent with me, but we need to get that fixed for you. Right. And that's where I
Yeah.
reference back to, I don't get as much in my shopping cart. Right. That person is hustling and
Yeah.
there's nothing necessarily that's triggering because of potential, daily management systems and so forth that may not be operating properly. But with all that said, the reality check of the environment, something's not operating properly. Right. And
Yeah.
what it was, it's what I find is a common challenge in today's environment is, hey, we've been missing out on training folks that may not necessarily want to be in a labor market of an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate, right? Because for far too long, we've been packing that market full, and now the
Mm-hmm.
cycle is turning around.
Yeah.
Long story short, right? This person had a photo eye changed out during a shift. And unbeknownst to, that person, the management team, and a new mechanic, right? They changed out that photo eye to the incorrect type, right? It was
Mm,
looking for a open state, and therefore it was looking for the logic for that case pack to not be in front of it. And it was waiting for the restart condition. And basically, it would not happen until that operator would push that case to make an open state condition for that photo eye to cause an automatic restart. That is far from automatic. We
yeah.
have to ask ourselves, what did I buy the line for? How did I intend the line to operate? And what do I do to make it get back to that? So I think back to AW's question. It's been a long journey, but AW, new lines, old lines that have been installed for years that have a story that's multiple chapters deep. Best case scenario, you perform a line balancing optimization event on a new line to validate it before it's ever signed off that you approve of this line and that OEM is now leaving your doorstep. We've done it in a couple of scenarios in a couple of manufacturing plants where we installed brand new lines from front to back, even some that were front to back, one OEM with maybe a couple of, supporting OEMs to, for different equipment. And even in those, what I'll call turnkey, so to speak, solutions, we would do that LBO process, and it requires a relationship management technique, right? I'm not looking to, hurt you. I'm not looking to, take any money or any opportunities away from you as a company, but we together collectively have to partner to make this line operate at its best. Hey, you OEM service technician, this may mean you don't have to come here quite as frequent. Sign me up, right? And it's partnering together in the pre-work and pre-planning to do that LBO process from front to back of that line. And I can tell you almost always there is opportunities that are found. You can't guarantee that it is 100% success rate, and it's operating right from the start. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I was going to say one thing that I really admire and appreciate about this conversation is just the human element that you bring to what some people would probably consider like a very dry, numbers, engineering oriented thing. And I think that is just like you said, based on your background in politics. So I hope that people hear that, and especially people on the factory floor. I always try to think from the employee's perspective as I'm talking on the show. And, I know that a lot of people are very concerned about humanoid robots, AI, automation, and all of these things. But I think if there's one silver lining in all the stories that you mentioned, it was the human that was developing this workaround that the machinery didn't think of or wasn't programmed to do. So I think to your point, there's always going to be a human element in manufacturing, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. AW, did you have anything you wanted to close out with? And Ryan, I think we're about coming up on time. So, yeah.
Been
I
a pleasure.
was,
Thank you.
I've done a couple of those line balancing, Ryan, and I find them quite fun because it's like a puzzle, and you're solving all these little things. It's never usually the same thing on it. And Alexander and I, we recently did an episode on Elon Musk on some of his manufacturing topics and how he goes in and, he had this idea of automating everything. And then he comes in and realizes, yeah, we're not ready for it yet. And he start
Mhm.
ripping the stuff out. But just, when you're paying the bills, you can do that. Not necessarily
Absolutely.
all of us can have that kind of luxury, but I look at these line optimizations as kind of of almost a scavenger hunt, finding those defects and finding those the ways of optimizing the line efficiencies because you can see the results almost immediately sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. We
But
were typically demonstrating within, a 4 to 6 week timeline is what we were really aiming for. You could typically demonstrate so long as you had active planning, completion and really engagement from the teams, you could definitely see the results, in what I would call an industry instantaneous amount.
Yeah.
all
So,
right,
so typically, Ryan, we either say we're out of here like finished goods or we're clocking out, but I'm gonna let you close it out with your tagline that you were sharing before we started recording, if you would like.
I'm trying to think which one that was, Alexander. I got a lot of
I
taglines.
was gonna say, we're primed to deliver, right?
oh
That's
yeah,
what you use.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, I appreciate you guys' time. It's been super good spending time with you. Would love to join for more conversations, and really passionate topic for me. But I think this closes out the podcast. Like line balancing optimization, we are primed to deliver.
There you go. Thanks for being on the show.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. But no, thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
That was fun. Thank you.